streaming on? I think it is. This is my first ever live stream doing it this way. We're doing it live! I am running this myself, so hopefully it is working. Hey, I see comments coming from Paul Cruz. What's up, Paul? As you can see, this is the Young Heretics live stream Q&A. It is open to everybody. Anybody that wants to come join can. Share the link if you haven't already, but the only people who can ask questions are the people on Locals, that is the VIPs. If you are not a VIP yet on Locals, come and join us. It's an amazing community. I look forward every day to chatting with the VIPs. It's an amazing way to get deeper into the great works of the West and commune together about how we integrate those works and the principles in them into our lives. That's what this live stream is going to be about, and so I'll give you a sense of the sort of stuff we talk about, not just the intellectual stuff, but the lifestyle stuff, the lifting, the eating, the drinking whiskey, all of that. I'm taking questions about all of that, but only from VIPs. So in order to ask these kinds of questions and to get all the extra goodies that we do on Locals, go to youngheretics.com/locals and become an annual VIP for $56, which is 4 months for free, or a monthly VIP, which is $7 a month. Okay, let's get started. This is a live stream. People have asked me questions in advance. I will also be taking questions as we go from VIPs only. We've got a bunch of them. I hope I will get to as many of them. Well, I will get to as many of them as I can. I hope I will get to a lot of them. I'm not totally sure. We'll go for about half an hour or 45 minutes. We'll see how many I can get. Hey, Kenny, I see your comment down there. This is so cool. I can see you guys reacting. This is my first time doing this. Okay. Here are some questions from VIPs on Locals. This first one is from the Huns. I was wondering how you interpret being created in the image of God. In a recent discussion, my family took a literal view that our physical body is like God, but since God is not physical, I interpreted it as consciousness and the ability to create and reason. And this stemmed from a what would aliens look like if God created the universe conversation. Okay, so I'm more on your side, the Huns, than your family. I don't interpret being created in the image of God to mean that God finally and absolutely looks like a human being, although I do believe that he incarnated himself in a human body, right? I mean, so if you believe in Jesus, you believe that God is capable of fully expressing himself, at least to us, in the medium of the life. But I don't think that means that that's where the imago Dei stops. And the imago Dei is the Latin translation of the Hebrew in Genesis 1 and 2, itzmenu, in our likeness. And that gives you a key, I think, to how I would want to interpret this in a deeper way, right? Because likeness, and all Hebrew words, one of the wonderful things about biblical Hebrew is that they're kind of bigger, their concepts are bigger usually than the narrow and specific words that we use in English. English has more words, and each word denotes a sort of smaller concept. Hebrew has fewer words, and each word denotes this huge range of things. So it's not just physical likeness, but also, in some essential way, we reflect who God is. And there's another key to that, right? Because let us make mankind in our image. Then he created mankind in his image, male and female created he them, right? And we know that there aren't people who are both male and female, and yet our being the image of God is expressed both in our maleness and our femaleness. So I think it's maybe closer to that tripartite existence that we have, which Plato talks about, but which Jesus also refers to when he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and being or body, right? That we are, this combination, right, of reason, that is the consciousness that you refer to, but also the ability to express that consciousness in real life and to enact it in the world, and ideally, right, to live out the highest and truest virtues. I hope that helps answer the question. I don't think that the scripture really supports, and it wouldn't make sense to me for only people that look like us to be able to be in the image of God. God seems bigger than that to me. Okay, thank you, the Huns. Here's another one from Falderall. What is your opinion on taking static works in their existing medium, think the epic poem of Beowulf, Dante's Inferno, Plato's Republic, and turning them into interactive works like video games, tabletop games, living history museums? Is something lost by allowing the viewers to influence the art being presented, or is this a natural extension of the viewer seeing their own version of the art presented? So I wrote some pieces about this on a publication, a website called Law and Liberty, and you can find both my argument that video games are art on Law and Liberty. It's called An Art That Offers Choices. And then there's also a response from somebody that disagreed with me, and we went back and forth a little bit. So, I mean, some people, whoa, I knocked my camera over. Some people, notably the movie critic, oh my gosh, what was his name? Well, anyway, a great movie critic made an argument that video games can never be art. I think that that's too extreme, but I do think that video games, like all media, all art forms, are a very specific kind of medium. And just like if you took the epic poem of Beowulf, this is Falderall's example. In fact, he's mentioning a couple epic poems, Dante's Inferno, Beowulf, but also Plato's Republic, right? Just thanks, bruh. I got this haircut just yesterday. It is my white boy summer haircut. So if you took Beowulf, right, and you made it into a movie, for example, like that's been done, you would have to make a lot of changes in order to accommodate the different medium, and you wouldn't be able to do some things, and you would be able to do others. Like you would be able to show really vividly what the monster Grendel looks like. But you wouldn't be able to get those wonderful alliterative lines that you get and compounds that you get in the Old English, like Grendel, the Shadowganger. These things, all media are specific to themselves, and all adaptation involves changing the art and the content a little bit. And an interactive medium has its own sort of possibilities and also its own limitations. So one major limitation that video games sometimes provide, is that they often have to be kind of repetitive, and you have to find ways, if you want to do a creative narrative, you have to find ways around that. But they can also be very emotionally immediate, right? I see somebody says we need a new Beowulf film, not with Angelina Jolie. I agree, I did not like that adaptation very much at all. And also Grendel's mom is not supposed to be hot. Not to put too fine a point on it, but Grendel's mom is like a horrifying beast, not a hot lady like Angelina Jolie. Video games have an incredible emotional immediacy. If you've ever played Resident Evil, you know how terrifying that moment is, right? When the big, like, zombie dude comes out and jumps out at you from behind or whatever, star. I'm getting, like, nerdy about video games now, but the point is that, like, holding the controller in your hand is a unique experience, and just like listening to an epic poem is a unique experience. I do believe that all things which create mimesis, that human life, all of those things can be art, and video games are one such thing. But all adaptation causes new challenges and new possibilities. Hopefully that answers your question, Falderall. Okay, here is Michael. Michael asks, I would really enjoy hearing your thoughts about a trend I see in conservative discussions of art. Frequently, political and religious conservatism also comes with a skepticism toward or outright denunciation of modernist art. I'm thinking specifically of the dismissal of abstraction in visual art and an aversion to dissonance in classical music. That artists in the 20th century frequently supplanted beauty for other expressive ends is undeniable, but an outright rejection seems short-sighted, especially for what it can teach us about how people thought and felt during one of the most turbulent periods of history. Clearly, conservatism and modernism are entirely incompatible. I can't help thinking of T.S. Eliot. Okay, this is a really good question, and I've dealt with it a little bit before on the show, but it could use some more attention. There's a good treatment of this in the opening of a book called Glittering Images by Camille Paglia. Camille Paglia, not somebody that I agree with on everything, but she deals with the failures of the left and the right when it comes to art and supporting art. In my view, there was something inherently destructive about the modernist turn, and I think that it came out of, well, a lot of things, but it came out of especially the experience of the two world wars, that after that, right, the kind of art that ties things up into a perfectly orchestrated form no longer seemed accurately reflective of the reality of human experience. So what do I mean by that, right? Like, certain forms, like the sonnet, for example, just inherently, the poem form, the poetic form of the sonnet, just inherently, right, has this very contained, neatly tied up structure. And that's part of, the medium is always, just like I was talking about with Beowulf and video games, right, the medium is always part of the message. And you're always conveying something with the way that you say things, in addition to what you're saying. Those two things are intimately bound up together, especially when it comes to art. And so the classical model, which we get from, say, Renaissance Italy and even, the Netherlands, and this sort of turn in the early modern period back toward classical Greece, and the symmetry of form and the perfection of form, right? This technicity was very, very beautiful. And also, it suggested that the world had coherence and order to it. Now, I believe that the world does have coherence and order to it, but I also believe that there's chaos in the world, and that we sometimes, by so perfectly constructing our order and our narrative of order, right, we can become dishonest, and all forms grow old. And in the wake of the world wars, we have to understand that people were becoming disillusioned with this sort of high classical ideal of tying everything perfectly up in a neat little bow. And conservatives, I think, are very afraid of admitting that, because so often people say that, and then that's where they stop, right? This deconstructionist turn. There was no escaping it. This is what you have to understand, right? You couldn't honestly look at an artist like Joyce and say that he wasn't expressing something true about the world and about that moment, just like you're suggesting, Michael. But at the same time, people took what Joyce was doing and then they just totally ripped apart all form, right? Which ultimately is to rip apart all art. And I see that somebody is noting Picasso in the comments also, and he's another great example, right, of a person who was challenging what had become a very hidebound form of rulemaking in the artistic academy. And we have to acknowledge that that was true in order to recover some sense of how there is still order, right, even beyond the stuff that falls apart. And this is, I've talked about this even in ancient Greek work, like when I talk about Euripides. Euripides is somebody that shows us the chaos in a way that we can't deny, and reminds us that if we do deny it, it will destroy us. So I think conservatives make a mistake, but it's a mistake based on a real fear, which is that when you let that chaos in, then where does it end, right? And part of our challenge right now, I think, is finding our way back through the chaos, through our acknowledgement that things fall apart, back to a deist view of the world where God is indeed sovereign. I think we can. I think that's totally possible. But I also think that it's challenging, and that different historical eras, there's no getting away from the fact that these historical eras have reveal truths that we can't deny, and if we try to lie about them or deny them, we'll just lose. Thanks for that question, Michael. Zach, how would you respond to people that suggest that the things we discuss on the show, honor, courage, masculinity, femininity, etc., are biological phenomena rather than spiritual? Also, does this argument make you question your faith at all? Asking because I am fully embracing my faith now as a Christian and often wonder about this. Thanks. That's wonderful. I'm so glad, Zach, that you are embracing your faith as a Christian, and that means you're not shying away, right? Like, that does not mean that you aren't asking these difficult questions. In fact, you're asking them more profoundly. This is one of the great, I think, mistakes about faith, that it means like now you're not asking any more questions because you have it all perfectly, lined up. And sometimes the church can give that impression, but that impression is wrong, right? I mean, the big thing about faith is that you start out by saying, there are certain things that I believe to be true, even though I can't fully understand them. I feel and know them to be true, and now I'm going to be in a perpetual quest of understanding them more deeply. So faith does not close off these avenues of questioning at all. In fact, it opens them, because if we trust that there's meaning in these questions and in these deeper issues, right, then we are inspired, right, to push them deeper. Thank you, Zach, for asking about this. So the idea that everything that we believe, including our abstract aspirations like courage, honor, masculinity, femininity, right? The idea that all of this is just biological, that it has some kind of root in our need or our desires or whatever, this is a widespread belief. It's in the modern period, it can be attributed mostly, I think, to a radical form of Darwinism, right? That everything can be explained by finding roots for it in our, development as biological organisms. Now, I believe that we develop as biological organisms, and I believe that, we are always embodied, that everything we do talk about and aspire to on the show has some root or expression in what's really going on. I don't just talk about courage, I talk about like charging into battle, and that's a physical thing that you do for, material reasons. At the same time, right, there's no reason why, if those things are real, we should continue to aspire to them. If everything that we believe in is purely survivalist, that is, we just happen to believe in courage because it perpetuates the species, or if we just happen to believe in honesty because it's a pact that works well for tribes, that doesn't mean that's just what is. That's not ought, right? This is the philosophical distinction between is and an ought, right? Like, if this just happens to be what we do as animals, there's no reason then why I should do that, why I should be honest to you, if it doesn't benefit me, right? We experience moral imperatives like honor and like honesty, and we experience abstracts like masculinity and femininity as more than mere facts. We experience them as necessities, right? To say that they are just how we do things is to say that they're not what actually we experience them to be, which is laws of the universe. And so it doesn't give a full account of them just to say that they are biological realities. We have to actually say that they are things we should do whether or not they benefit our biology. And that's in fact the testing point of all virtue, is whether you do it whether or not it benefits you. And so this kind of Darwinian reductionist approach, which is taken by a lot of the new atheists as well, is no argument for continuing to live in a just society. In fact, it's currently being made clear to us as like social justice warriors and woke people try to dismantle the sort of traditional mores of our society. It's being made clear that a purely secular, purely biological account of our virtues can't stand up against that. There's no argument in it for why we should keep living a certain way if it turns out to be outdated. If the argument is like, well, this is how we used to live because, whatever biological explanation, but now we don't have to. In order for that not to be true, these things have to be eternal, and in order for them to be eternal, they have to be more than biological. Thank you for that question, Zach. Zach is a VIP on Locals, and since there are new people who have joined us, I'm going to pause here to just say that everybody is welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're watching. I hope these answers and these questions are edifying and helpful to you. If you want to be able to ask questions like this all the time, anytime you want, and to have immediate access to my answers and not just to have to wait for somebody else to ask them, then you should become a VIP on Locals. This is an amazing community. It's youngheretics.com/locals. locals. People who listen to my show know that I care very deeply and passionately about the great ideas of the West, and that I don't just think they are things that exist in books, but things that you can live out in your real life. And in order to live them out, you need a group of, a fellowship group, right? That's what the VIPs provide for each other. We encourage each other. In some cases, I've seen people share, for example, that they got baptized, and we all kind of gather around that. But then there's also just like, what whiskeys do we like? What workouts are we doing? And all of this under the heading of going deeper into and exploring more fully what it is that we do on the show, and that's recovering and defending the great traditions of the West. I hope you will join us if you haven't already. It's really a cool place to be. Go to youngheretics.com/locals to become a VIP. You can do it annually for $56 or monthly for $7. Okay, more questions. I have a question. This is from Kevin. I have a question about discernment. Your father mentioned on his podcast that you considered becoming a priest in your particular denomination. As someone who is discerning going into seminary, I am trying to figure out if it is in fact God calling me or just my ego/desire playing tricks on me, so I'm wondering what the beginning of your discernment looked like. Okay, great. Well, first of all, I don't know who you're talking about in terms of my father. Whoever you're talking about, I'm not related. There's no relationship between me and I think you probably mean Andrew Klavan, but even though we have the same last name, I'm not related to him. In any case, once that's cleared up, okay, so you are discerning whether or not to enter into ordination, which is a very high calling. I'm going to address this question in a more broad way because sometimes we talk as if like being a priest is the only kind of calling, the only kind of vocation is like the technical term. And actually, discernment and vocation is something that everybody participates in. And if you are a Christian or a person of faith, then you participate in it actively. But people who don't believe in God have other words for this. Like I'm, trying to figure out what my, sometimes you say I'm trying to figure out what my calling is or whatever. And Christians believe that kind of calling, that feeling of being drawn to something comes from God. Obviously, the first answer to your question is prayer, right? That you should talk to God about this. Something that I do a lot on locals is I just pray with the VIPs, and that's not at all because like all of them are of a particular denomination or a particular faith, but because I want people to have a space where they can like give God a trial run. We tend to think that we have to have all this figured out before we come to God, but actually, like, none of us is smart enough, myself included, to like figure out all of these. I mean, this is what we're talking about when like faith, right, is not about having all the answers. Faith is about acknowledging that there are certain mysteries in the world, like the existence of a higher power, and then committing yourself to forever seeking the more and more wisdom about that. And so, like, we do a lot of prayer, is what I'm trying to say, among the VIPs on locals. And something I emphasize a lot is like, that is not just like an exercise or a ritual, that's like talking to an actual person who wants to draw you to himself and to help you to gain that access to him. So when it comes to figuring out like what should I do with my life in this particular situation or whatever, this person is asking about the difference between like, oh, I just want this for my ego, or I happen to want it, or whatever, versus I am actually being drawn into this by a higher power than myself. A few things. Time, right? You need to test whether something endures, whether your desire and your vocation for something endures throughout and despite like the hardships that come with it. So, I mean, I believe that part of my vocation, a big part of my vocation, is doing this podcast and more generally writing and speaking what I understand to be the truth and hopefully what is given to me by God to speak. To be perfectly honest with you, right, that is not always a fun and happy thing to be doing. Nothing is always a fun and happy thing to be doing. Nothing of worth is always easy. And so the minute you set out on it for real, you're going to encounter like, oh my gosh, like, I have to send out this tweet, or I have to like, go on this be a guest on this podcast, or I have to do, you're gonna feel sometimes like you don't want to do something, and when you find that nevertheless, right, you experience a richness of desire. I think of this as like, I wake up every day and I am impelled. I'm impelled to be doing the stuff that I'm doing, and doing it is satisfying even when it's not fun. So that's one thing, right? That distinction between like I'm happy in this moment versus I am satisfied, richly satisfied and blessed to be doing this thing more generally. Think of it like working out, right? Like when you're a runner, for example, the actual experience of running can really kind of suck, and so you need to like keep pushing through it, or chest day, as Caleb says in the comments, right? You've got to like keep pushing through that, because you have this like in general bigger calling to be doing this thing, right? Because it is good for you, and then of course like talk to other people about it, like talk with people about it. Faith is a team sport. It's not like this is something that you need to like lock yourself away in a room and think about, although you should be talking one-on-one to God. All of these things, right, like come together, and God sometimes leads you into places that aren't going to be the ultimate like outcome of where you need to be. And that's okay too, right? Like part of faith is accepting that we're going to go down wrong paths, and that doesn't mean God has abandoned us. It might mean that we needed to like experience that and throw ourselves into it, and gain whatever knowledge we were gaining from it in order to understand that actually that's not my final destination. And so you'll figure out as you go through that journey whether or not you're just following your own ego. Like you'll be able to tell as you face challenges and as you persist through them, and as you pray, right? You will be able to tell whether this is something that's generated by you or coming to you from God. Since we're talking about workouts, you can all see that I'm wearing my Lifting is Infrastructure t-shirt. You can get these at youngheretics.com/shop. There are still some available, although they are going fast. When you buy them, I will personally rip the sleeves off of yours. I ripped the sleeves off of this one, and all 200 of them that are available for sale, youngheretics.com/shop. Lifting is Infrastructure, because it is. Okay, Tyler. I'm gonna keep going for as long as I can, but I may not get to all these questions this time, which means that if you want to keep asking me questions, you should become a VIP. Greetings, inheritor of Klavanon. I've been reading a book about Japanese Bushido, and I was surprised to hear a lot of connection to Christianity, chivalry, and Nicomachean ethics. Fair point. There was an emphasis on honor as well, which reminds me of a quote from Carl Trueman's book about how modern Western society changed from a focus on honor to dignity. Firstly, I would like to hear your thoughts on Eastern philosophy, and then my broader question is, if the East were to embody Western traditional philosophies, could we look at them as a way of regaining our values, or can the moral struggle for our society only be resolved internally? So, there are a number of interrelated questions here. There's one about, right, Eastern philosophy generally. I've said this before on the show, but it is still true that I have benefited enormously from many works of Eastern philosophy. The Tao Te Ching especially was very profound and powerful for me on my walk to faith. C.S. Lewis uses the Tao as a kind of example of what some Christians would call indiscriminate grace. That is the idea that, like, not everything needs to be given to you by special revelation, but some things, right, just come to you like through your reasoning, through your logic, through knowing stuff. So like, all cultures have some idea that there is right and wrong. And the Tao is kind of a very profound expression of some of those things. And Confucianism is another one, right? Like, I mean, that's a very broad term for like a lot of different things that were written over the course of China's late antique history, but it's very closely related, for example, to Stoicism. And the idea, I've talked about oikeiosis before, the idea that we have these natural connections amongst one another that go broader and broader. So first you have a connection to your family, and then to your neighbors, and then to your town, and then to your country, and there's the world, right? These outward circles of stuff. So yeah, there are a lot of parallels, and the way that a Christian like me at least, would explain that is through the idea of indiscriminate grace, that logic does give us some access to truth, even though it doesn't give us access to all truth, some of which is revealed. Now, God can use and save anybody from any culture. My focus on the West is not because I think that like only the West will be saved. That would be ridiculous and anti-gospel. Because remember, of course, that Jesus says like make disciples of all nations. My focus on the West has to do with the fact that I know and love it best. And also I think it's under assault, and so I think it needs champions and it needs people who know about it to refute the lies about it. That doesn't mean that the East has no value. It doesn't mean that there can't be a Christianizing of some of the ideas. Just like, you know, a lot of Greek and pagan ideas were Christianized. Also, a lot of, you know, Shinto and Taoist and Confucianist ideas have been Christianized by Christians in those regions. And so, you know, on the road to Emmaus, Jesus says to his disciples, like, everything was always about me. And John, chapter 1, right? Is like, you know, all things that were made through him. So it stands to reason that they would all have the imprint of God on them. They could all have that revealed, all have that illuminated. And my focus on the West is not to be taken as an assertion that that's not possible. It's just to say that I am a Westerner. I believe in the enormous value of the West. I believe that those of us who live in the West should understand it and love it. And that's why I'm here and why I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay, we have time for a few more. Okay, hello, nice to meet you. I am from South Korea. This is Jin Young Moon. I'm a South Korean gay conservative who is the American way, capital C conservative, not Korean fake, also Confucian conservative. My life has changed a lot since I started studying Western philosophy and Western civilization, especially Anglo-American conservatism in earnest in 2014. How should we respond to the far left-leaning nationalists in Korea who view these core values of Western civilization and universal values such as freedom, individuality, republicanism, and liberal democracy from a nationalized perspective? So I'm not 100% sure that I completely understand this question, but I think it is related to the question that I was answering just a second ago, which is like, how many of our values are like specific to our time and place, and how many of them are universal, and how do we refute people who say that there are no universal values, right? That you know, all of these ideas like republicanism and universal rights that are the great flower of Western political philosophy, how do we respond to people who say that those are just, you know, white men saying a certain thing at a certain time because they wanted whatever, money, they wanted to enslave people, yada yada. Basically, I think the answer to this is there are universal truths. All men are endowed by their creator with the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's like a bar none statement. All men are endowed with those rights, and any system that denies them those rights is unjust and not fulfilling the function of government. However, we all come to those truths through the specific place that we're at and the life that we live. And so it may look different, right, to discover those truths and to enshrine them in a South Korean context than it does in an American context. I don't know because I've never been to South Korea. But I do know that, for example, right, in England, at least ideally, you know, this isn't about a statement about British politics right now, but just, you know, take Edmund Burke, for example, right? In England, those liberties evolved in a very specific way that is not the American way. So, for example, the strife between the barons and the kings in, well, from the 13th century onward, from Magna Carta onward, generated this incredibly complex, delicate, unwritten system of negotiating liberties and rights between the elites, the gentry, the nobility, and the monarchy, and then eventually, right, all the voting public, the parliament, all this stuff, right? Like, that is a version, a parliamentary democracy, a constitutional monarchy, a version of having liberty and defending liberty and what is called the rights of Englishmen. It's very, very different from the American republican system, small r republican, with an executive and a legislature. And I mean, this is based on classical models that we've talked about, like Polybius, yeah? Both of those systems, I believe, are founded on certain eternal truths, like the inalienable right to liberty. And those rights emerged gradually over time. This is one of the reasons why neglecting our history or sniffing at our history because it's not as enlightened as we think we are and we now are. This is one of the reasons why that's such a terrible idea, because it's like cutting the tree out from underneath you upon which you sit. That's you know, that's suicide, essentially. And every culture is going to have a different version of that history. But if we believe in absolute truths, as I do, we believe that that history is going to carry you ultimately to some recognizably essential reality, like the truth of liberty, like the truth that all men are endowed by their creator, that is, there is a God, with the right to the pursuit of happiness. All of these things I believe to be universal, but I believe the way you get to them is specific to your time and place. I hope that that has answered your question. And okay, let us see if I can find some that I can answer in the next like 5 minutes. Okay. Personally, I think David Hume's, this is also from Jin Young Moon, personally, I think David Hume's theory of moral sentiments has had some influence on the culture of political correctness, but what do you think? Okay, yeah, so a great book about this is called After Virtue by Alistair MacIntyre. And MacIntyre, I think, really deals well with this idea of emotionalism, which is that, like, our sentiments, our moral sentiments are just that when we have a moral judgment, like this is wrong, it boils down ultimately to like an emotional response to things. And basically my answer to this is, well, it's true that we have a kind of moral instinct and reaction to things, and that is part of how we discern the moral universe. But that moral instinct must correspond to something in the outside world if we're going to care about morality at all. So just like when I see red, right, I don't necessarily think, oh, there's some essential nature of the thing outside of me that I can know, but I do think that there's something that I'm perceiving in the outside world that is red, that's common with all red things. Or I see a table, right, and I think that I'm perceiving something real in the outside world. When I see, for example, infanticide, right, like some evil act, I have a moral reaction to that that does involve my emotions, but that doesn't mean that it's just my emotions, right? And this is where Hume, to me, goes terribly wrong, is he identifies that emotions are involved and then says that that's all that there is, and I quite disagree. We have time probably for one more. Yeah, somebody asked about the infallibility of the Bible. I want to make a distinction. So biblical infallibility, right, is often confused with the idea that God spoke every word of the Bible. All scripture is God-breathed, it says this in the epistles. But that does not actually mean that, for example, if one manuscript says, you know, if one manuscript has one version of a word and another manuscript has another version of the word, this doesn't explode my faith, because I make a distinction between infallibility and inerrancy. All scripture is true, that is, it expresses truth, but it is not inerrant, that is, it does not have, inerrant would mean that it had no inaccuracies in it of any kind. Textual inaccuracies, factual inaccuracies, whatever. A good example of this is like in the book of Joshua, it says that the sun stood still over the earth. The sun doesn't move around the earth, so that doesn't make any sense if you are an inerrantist, if you believe that all things that are said in the Bible are factual truths. But if you believe that the Bible has many different genres in it, poetry, for example, and history and allegory, right? If Jesus speaks in all of these ways, then you can say, well, okay, this is a description of what it was like to be on the battlefield when God stopped the passage of time or the motion of the heavens. And so that means that what he actually did was stop, from our perspective, is stop the earth. But from Joshua's perspective, it looked as if he stopped the sun, right? And so to be an inerrantist, right, is to say that the sun must therefore revolve around the earth. But to be an infallibilist, or to believe as I do that all scripture is true, well, then you can say this is a description of what it was like, and that is accurate and true, and something did happen that caused the sun to stop in its perceived motion around the Earth, but you don't have to be an inerrantist about it and believe that the sun actually rotates around the Earth. Hope that helps. And it also means, by the way, that, you know, things have happened over the course of time, like different manuscripts of the Bible. We still, you know, there are different authoritative texts of the Greek, of the, even the original Greek of the New Testament. Now, the differences in them are minuscule. They really don't matter in terms of meaning. But if you're an inerrantist, they're a big problem. They're not for me. It just means, like, you know, this is a God-inspired work. That is, God presided over the composition and the creation of it, but it was human beings who put it together. And so it was not just like, you know, God said these words and then they were written down. It was like God inspired people to write them, and this is the book he wants us to have. Somebody asked how I'm going to celebrate the 4th, and I'm going to end with that because that's Helen, who is a VIP on Locals. So I will answer. I'm not totally sure yet, but I'm definitely going to be celebrating by a pool somewhere. I think it's probably going to be in Michigan. I think I'm going to go out to one of the beaches in Michigan. We haven't decided for sure, but there's a 3-day weekend. I'm really looking forward to it. I will drink many White Claws, and I will go swimming and set off a million fireworks because America is the greatest country in the world. Even still, even now. Okay, thank you guys so much for joining me for this. This was super fun. If you are not yet a VIP on Locals, I invite you warmly to join us. It's an amazing community. Go to youngheretics.com/locals so that you can ask questions like this all the time and have them answered, and all sorts of other great benefits to, like, episodes a week in advance. youngheretics.com/locals. You can become an annual member for $56, a monthly member for $7 a month. I hope to see you there. Thank you all for your questions. These were really smart, thought-provoking, and I look forward to doing it again soon. Bye.